My name is Jeremy Beal. As you can see in the picture, yes, I'm a black belt. I'm a black belt in Taekwondo, 3rd degree. All that being said, we're going to dive into today's session. We've got a ton of stuff that we're going to be talking about today. So I may be talking pretty fast, right? So because of that, please feel free to make sure that you click any links that you see that are a part of this video, are a part of this session for today. We're going to be talking about dynamic emergency calling, and it's going to be an overview, right? It's going to be a 30,000 foot view, presentation. We won't get too deep into the weeds, but don't worry, we have your back. We have some people that are in the crowd today that will be able to answer your questions and that sort of thing. So with that said, let's go ahead and let's dive in. This is our agenda for today. We're going to be going through all the stuff that's on the screen. I'm not really going to bleed this slide to death because we're going to talk about all of this stuff here. But these are the things that we're going to be going through today. So what is dynamic emergency calling? Dynamic emergency calling is really the ability to call through Teams and Teams be able to figure out where you're at in the world. And that's specific to emergency calling. All right. So when we talk about emergency calling, the concept is actually simple, right? You make the call from your endpoint. It goes to the emergency call routing provider. It then gets to the emergency services. That's really what we're looking at here. But more importantly, the concept is easy, but the details really get pretty deep into the weeds. So here's the considerations that we have. There's some legislation that was put in place, right? Kari's Law, we'll talk through that. Baum's Act, we'll talk through that as well. We also want you to consider your organizations and where you're located, if you're inside the US or if you're outside of the US. We want to kind of work through that as well. And then does your organization have a plan, whether it's with Teams or without Teams, right? Do you have a plan for if somebody's calling on 911 on any of your apps? But more importantly, of course, we're Teams. We want you to use Teams, but we've got your back again, and we'll be able to make sure that through today's presentation, we'll see how the cogs all mesh and how we can make it work through Teams. All right, so with Kari's Law, I'll give you a little quick story. There was a little girl, her name was Kari, and she, her and her mother were in a hotel room in Texas, and something tragic happened. She dialed 911, not knowing that she had to dial an extra digit to get out. So because of that, the Kari's Law was born. And with any kind of VoIP system, you're looking to not have to dial something before you get out to 911. And that's really what the Kari's Law is all about. So the Baum's Act was put in place because on premises and off premises as well, as long as you can dial 911 from any device, we need to be able to find out exactly where you're at. And so because of that, we put the Baum's Act in place, and that's really government legislation that fosters helping emergency services get to you wherever you're at in the world. Also, a shout out to veterans here. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline was put in place really for, in my opinion, really for veterans to help with anybody that has any kind of suicidal thoughts or anything like that. You can dial 988 and you can get straight out to suicide prevention, and that helps as well. With anybody that's suffering from any kind of mental illness, we really want to look out for those folks as well. All right, here's some additional legislation that was put in place. Not going to bleed this one to death, but I also want you to go and click on these links that are here, that are in blue. You can click on those links and you can get to the legislation by the state as well. All right, so remember I mentioned that we have links that you can click. There's one that's on the top, the emergency call routing for calling plans, right? So there's a couple of considerations that we have for places that are outside of the US. I have a lot of Canadian customers, so I get to deal with this a lot. I'm also from Canada, so I had to deal with that as well there too. But countries as Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, the UK, they have different means of getting emergency services to you. So I want you to go ahead and click on that link that's at the top so you can take advantage of exactly how those countries operate from an emergency perspective. We will talk a bit through that though as we go through this. All right, so let's talk about dynamic location awareness and how does all that work? How does it look? How do you configure it? That sort of thing. All right. So again, remember I mentioned that the concept is simple, but this is where we start getting into the weeds, right? So to the far left, we'll work our way from the left to the right. You're signing in on an internal IP address. All of the network elements that go along will all be brought out through what we call PID-FLO, and we'll discuss what all that means here in a bit. But essentially, you're over here and you're looking at your internal IP address that then gets translated to your external IP address. All of that information then gets sent through PID-FLO to the emergency services, so then they'll know exactly where you're at. And that's really what this slide is all about. All right, so how do we know whether or not to use dynamic emergency calling and to turn it on for that particular end user? It all starts with the trusted IP. The trusted IP is really your corporate external IP address, your public-facing IP address. That's when you sign in, there's this thing, it's a really cool thing called the SDP. And in the SDP, it has all of your network information from your internal IP address, all of the network elements that are associated with that. And so all of that, when you sign in from a trusted IP address, and we'll talk about what that means here in a moment as well, but that then tells everything else to go ahead and turn itself on, so then we can take advantage of the location information services and the team's policies and the site assignments and the network configuration. What does all that mean and how do we get to all of that? We'll discuss all of that here shortly. All right, so emergency places, this is going to be really the first thing that you're going to be configuring. The emergency addresses and places, this is the thing that says that this place is attached to one of our trusted IP addresses. So then when you dial 911, it will then send this information through PID-FLO because you're signing in from a location that's inside one of your public trusted IP addresses. All right, and then the next piece that we'll get to from there is your trusted IP addresses, right? So we go from, let's go back here really quickly. We go from the emergency addresses and places. Those then get attached to your trusted IP addresses. And again, remember, I said those trusted IP addresses are your public-facing IP addresses. Then we get through to the network identifiers. These are your wireless access points, your switches, your switch ports, Ethernet switches, subnets as well. Just make sure that when you work through these things, you work through them very, very carefully, right? Because if you have a switch that one subnet that spans multiple buildings or something like that, then we wouldn't be able to use that. And we'll talk through that here shortly as well. But I also want you to note over to the right side of this that all the network elements will go in the order from the top to the bottom that they're listed there, from the wireless access point down to subnets. All right, and this kind of works through pretty much the same as the last one, but as you can tell, these things are starting to be populated here, right? And I mean, you can use your BSS ID, you can use your switch ports, you can use your Ethernet switches, you can use the subnets, whichever one really works for your environment. We really want you to work through that. This is where you're going to take the time, right? Because if you look at it from an emergency perspective, we're essentially talking about life or death in certain circumstances, right? So we want to work through this very carefully. All right, so when do the clients use the location information services database, right? So when you sign in with your client, or when you authenticate, that's when it uses that's when it tells emergency services to go ahead and turn itself on. Remember, I mentioned the SDP, or the session description protocol. That's what gets sent when you sign in with Teams. Also, when you change from one location to another location from within, it will also it'll send the SDP again, and once it does that, it'll detect that it's on another subnet or it's attached to another wireless access point and that kind of thing as well. Mobile clients. Yes, mobile clients can use emergency services as well. There's a couple of things that are specific to those, specifically with iOS. right? Teams will fetch your location. It'll also fetch your location if you had the calls app open for more than 5 minutes, right? That's one thing that's very important to know, because if you're on a call that's a 911 call, that you may need to consider having the calls app open for 5 minutes or more. All right, so a lot of what we had mentioned earlier was inside the organization, but what about home workers, right? Because right now, and moving forward, we're kind of in a remote work scenario here, right? So how does all of that look? Well, let's kind of dive into that. So when you're working from home, a couple of things that we can go through here. Teams client will, first of all, it won't be signing in from your internal IP addresses. So it's going to be signing in from your external IP address, which is going to be technically your home location. The operating system will help you out here immensely, because your operating system can detect where you're at based on ISP locations. Quick point here: if you're on cable internet, or if you're on AT&T's fiber, or if you're on Spectrum's fiber, one thing that you may want to consider is that wherever the pedestal is, and this is free information here, wherever the pedestal is out on the street, that may be the location where your operating system is saying that it's actually located. Don't worry, we have your back. We have ways that you can enable that and ways that you can edit that as well. All right, so this is actually how we do that, right? So if you go to your calls app that's on the left side rail, and you go down, you can see underneath the dial pad where your address is saying that it's located at, right? You can edit that. When you edit that, then it will give you your real address, and that will also help 911 services get to you a whole lot faster, rather than going, 30 meters down the street to, your next door neighbor's house or their next door neighbor's house. This is the way that we decide how it gets to you, whether or not you get sent to the national screening center, or if it gets sent to your local PSAP. So this is specific to the US, because in Canada, everything goes to the national screening center, and then it gets sent to the local PSAP. PSAP stands for Public Service Answering Point, right? So I'm not really going to bleed this to death, but just note and take a screenshot of this. Also, take advantage of the link that's down at the bottom. Click on it, and it will take you to the the site that we have that kind of works through what all this means, right? But direct to PSAP means that it's going to go directly to your local public service answering point. So if I'm in Jacksonville, Florida, it's then going to go to a place in Jacksonville, Florida, to the 911 call center that's there, and then they'll be able to dispatch from there. But if not, it's then going to go to a national screening center. The national screening center is then going to transfer that call to the local public service answering point. It does take an extra step, but again, this is the best way for us to get to you, making sure that we have your exact location. All right, so a couple of things that I want to point your attention to here. Notice that this says matched here, right? That's highlighted in yellow. This says matched, that's here over in yellow as well. These are when you're actually you signed in from from your internal location, and it's finding exactly where you are. There's a couple of things that go along here. I'm not going to bleed this one to death, but this is just an example of how it gets to the PSAP specifically. I'm going to kind of breeze by a couple of these, but this one I want to make sure that I note here. This one gets screened and then transferred to the local PSAP. Notice that the verify, you have to verify this. And then when you verify it, if you're verifying it manually, sorry, folks, we don't trust humans as much as we trust the automation. So anytime that you'll have to go and manually make a change, then it will go to the, it will get screened, and then it'll get sent to the public service answering point. All right, so let's kind of breeze through these because a lot of this is kind of rinse and repeat. But I just want you to kind of understand that if you have to make a manual change, then it will get sent to the local, it'll get sent to the National Service Center. then sent to the public service answering point. All right, so a couple of things to keep in mind. The work from home experience it's in both desktops of Mac and Windows. Teams Phones does not support the work from home experience. The Teams Mobile does, but there's a couple of things that are specific to that. The privacy settings, sometimes they conflict with your organization's bylaws and configuration policies. So you can always use MDM to make sure that you're well within your corporate compliance. Again, we have a link on the bottom, so please feel free to go ahead and click that. All right, so Teams emergency policies. This is actually one of my favorites because, especially for my folks in Canada, anytime that we have a person that makes a call, according to the Kari's law, we have to make sure that somebody else is notified if it's a VoIP system. This is our way of doing that, right? And if you take a look over to the right, we have two policy settings. These are both separate policy settings. I want to call your attention to this piece down here. We want them conferenced in, and in my opinion, this is Jeremy speaking, not Microsoft, but we want them conferenced in and unmuted. And the reason for that is because if somebody makes a call and God forbid something should happen and they collapse or they can't answer, we have a person that's on the call that would be able to tell services exactly where they're at. Remember, again, this is life and death, right? And so we want to make sure that we manage this properly and we take it very seriously. So this is the notification when somebody gets notified. Essentially, this is really what it looks like. But even more so than that, we have it definitely goes deeper than that, but we'll work through that here shortly as well, time permitting. So Teams does not notify via email. Why? Because email is not real-time communication. It's get it when you get it, unfortunately. So we won't be able to utilize email we won't be able to utilize email for emergency calling. It's going to be Teams only because it's real time and it comes through immediately. All right, take a look at the top of this underneath the calls tab that's up there. We have a notification that's there. Yes, that will show up anytime that you have an emergency call that's going to be going out. The Teams emergency routing policy, if you're using direct routing, this is what you're going to need to configure. You can always reach out to the Converge Comms CSMs. You can always reach out to us here in FastTrack. We will help you and we'll guide you through setting up these so that your dial string can make it from one point to another. Notice we have 933. That's our test. Notice on the bottom we have 911, but on the other side we have 112. 112 is what they're using in other locations. We'll talk through that here shortly as well. And I know I keep saying that, but we will actually. But that's essentially if you're in another location and you need to get to the 911 services that are local to your country. All right, so remember I mentioned PID-FLO. PID-FLO stands for Presence, Information, Data, Format, Location, Object. And that's really just a lot to say that we send whatever information you put in your policy, we send that information through. So then if you're on the third floor, at the back, behind the green door, all of that information can be sent. So then when it gets to the emergency services, they'll know exactly how to get to where you're at. This is a list of the emergency call routing providers. We have the certified session border controllers. We also have E911 service providers that help us to get your call from your endpoint to emergency services. This is specific if you're using direct routing as well. Right, when I first started here, we had I think we had 3 of the certified 911 service providers. Now we have, look at how many we have, and we have even more than what's listed here as well. All right, so let's continue here with dynamic assignment of emergency policies. All right, so here's the scenario. Jane works in New York, but there's also an office in California. If she goes from one office to another, we need to make sure that we send the correct information for where she's at, right? So we'll do that using PID-FLO. We'll use that, we'll basically use that by configuring the dynamic emergency calling services and policies to make sure that they're in place so that when one person goes from one place to another, that yes, the services can figure out exactly where they're at based on the sign-in for that person. Just a couple of things here. Site policies take place over user policies. The reason for that is because in the event that somebody goes from one place to another and it doesn't actually, the user policy doesn't actually take place, the site policy will take place. Let's see here. Also, the tenant network components, they are not used to map the emergency addresses. Those are something that have to be actually put in very specific and very intentional by the admins. All right, so here is the policy as well. Or this is the flow or the format. We have the network region. You could be in the USA, you could be in Canada. That's what's considered the region. You could be in the Americas, you could be in EMEA, you could be in APAC. That's really going to be what we're looking at from the region perspective. But from the site perspective, I may be in the Detroit office or I may be in the Jacksonville, Florida office. That's going to be, the office itself is going to be what you're going to consider the site. And then more specifically, the subnets, those are going to be the actual location where you're located at. All right, and again, we get to this scenario where you see that the policies are being matched, and that's what's telling the 911 services or the emergency services exactly how to get to where the end user is at based on what the admin set up in the team's admin center. So notice up at the top we've got the this is the site. Then this is this is making sure that the this piece here is making sure that we're signing in from an internal site or an internal IP address. And this one here is marking the element, the network element, as to where they're actually located at. I know we're getting short here on time, but I promise I'll do my best to make it through all of this. Subnets, I just want to kind of highlight the bottom piece here. Subnets must be unique. You cannot have a subnet that spans one building and another building and then try to use it. It won't work that way. It won't allow you to use it in that way, in that fashion. This is what the end user is going to see when they make the call. Notice that it states their number, it states their location, and when it states their location, this is exactly what they're going to see on the other side, plus any information that comes through with PID-FLO. So caller ID policy and E911 policy. The caller ID policy, basically it masks what you're going to be, what call number it looks like you're calling out from. That will be bypassed. Additionally, if with shared calling, that number will be tied to that person for the next 60 minutes. All right, so this is essentially what the client location information is going to look like. I'm not going to bleed this to death, but this is basically based on client itself. All right, the supported clients, these are the supported clients. Please feel free to click on this link so that it can help you to understand the clients that are supported and the versions therein as well. That's the most important piece of that. All right, other clients, yes, we do support VDI, but there's a few things that go along with VDI. I want you to click on the link, and I know I keep saying that, but we're kind of short on time here. But we want you to go ahead and click on the link so then you can understand exactly how to navigate the VDI environment. Desk phones, we kind of pretty much went over this, but essentially when you get the notification, yes, you should review it. You should add your exact location, so then when you dial from a hard phone, it can get to where you're supposed to be getting to. Teams iOS app, let's just bypass this one for now, only for the sake of time. Voice-enabled channels, also known as call queues, yes, they do support. They support E911 as well. And so let's go through shared calling here for a moment. Shared calling, there will be a teaser. This is just a teaser, really. That Don and Jonathan are really going to be speaking more about in the future. But yes, we absolutely support calling E911 when you're using shared calling as well. Shared calling is really cool. You can use one number for a multitude of people. It's really, really cool. All right. Again, this kind of walks through a little bit of what we had mentioned before. I'm not going to bleed this to death because we're already 1 minute over. But the cost savings, this is the piece actually I usually run hard and fast from. But notice at the bottom, we've got 2,000 end users that are going to be using Teams over Jabber. And when we're using Teams over Jabber for 2,000 users, we're looking at saving roughly around $6,000. Multiply that by 10, and that's going to be one of your senior help desk engineers' salaries for the year, right? So that's a great savings and a great way to look at that as well. Multi-platform. So this is where we want to have you connect with us, right? So this is where we want you to ask your Converged Comm CSM. We want you to go to FastTrack. Click on the link that's there. Reach out to us. We can absolutely help you in that regard, and we can really, really work through any of the problems that you have from there on in. So with that, actually, this is the last slide here, which is the deployment plan. Really, this is everything that we had talked through here, and this is what your basic plan would look like. Please reach out to your Converged Comm CSM. Please reach out to FastTrack. We can walk you through every little piece of this and make sure that you get the emergency calling plan and make sure that your end users are nice and safe. And with that said, Don, you can take it over. I can't believe I made it through all of that in that amount of time.
Way to go, Jeremy. All right. Thank you. There was a lot of